Right, hello. Oh, excuse me. Hello there. That's rust for you. Hello there. We haven't done one of these for a while, so just thought I'd do a quick project and a Creator Hangout just to get the make sure everything's working okay. Still, even though we're paying for it. Anyway, so IMVU. Excuse me. Just going to make a quick accessory using the toolkit. Come on, Blender. There we go. And for speed, just going to use it to shortcut keys. So you need to be familiar with the shortcut keys. I mean, if you're watching this sort of stuff, you should be at least familiar with the basics. So the N key, N for nuclear, toggles the thingy bar, the whatchamacallit, the sidebar. There's the shortcut key. If you're going to start using Blender, you need to make sure you start using the shortcut keys. Anywho, so I'm going to make an accessory or an attachment. So append attachment file. That drops in the skeleton without the mesh because we need to select a bone that we are going to use first. We want the head. So set the head so we can either select it from the list so it's there, or if it's one of the bones that's down here somewhere, which is way down the list, it's easiest just to use the thingy picker and pick the bone. But you can also just set an armature just to get this skeleton to appear, and then set the correct armature from the list. So that's our, that's in 1.5. So let's go back to the default. So the male. So this is the new avatar actually. So this is new since our last stream. So we've now got some new updates to the avatars. These are slightly higher resolution meshes than the defaults. Where is it? Wireframe. There we go. Wireframe. So that's the improved or updated version. Let's go back to the male, and this is the original. And we can see that there's quite a difference. But if you do use these for your items, depending on what your items are, you need to make sure that you are accommodating this shape, because there might be slight differences to the way that this is shaped in IMVU compared to the way that this is shaped. So you might get some clipping issues if you use the 1.5 avatars versus the originals, the defaults. So keep that in mind. So we've got a male one and a female. So that's the male one. And that is the female one. Let's just enable what? Let's just do this globally actually. So where's the wireframe? There, so that's the female. Got actual toes now. A bit more structure around the shoulders and on the hands. Same for the male. A bit more on the shoulders, the elbows, on the arms, hands, knees, and actual toes again, compared to the originals. But we can also, there's a hide option. That allows us to hide the avatar, the mesh at least, and drop in our own custom shape. You could drop in your own stickman and use that. So that's an improvement to the toolkit. So that's available for the attachment tool and the clothing tool, if I recall correctly. Anywho, so male, disable wireframe. Let's make the item. That drops in our shape. It's way too big. S scale. So I wonder if let's try doing it this way. Yeah, that'll work. It's going to make a simple bubble pipe. Scale. Nope. Just want those to the bottom. Scale. So a good way of doing things like this is just to block out the shape that you want first. So we just block out our basic shape. No details, nothing. And then we can shape the mesh by adding more cuts. So that's the edge slide. Where's loop cut? There it is, loop cut. Loop cut, loop cut, loop cut. That's all we need. Scale. Scale, make that rounder. Up. Add a loop cut here. That should be okay, just the one. And it doesn't matter about it being relatively roughly shaped, because that is literally all we're doing. Rough shaping. And then we can start adding a little bit more detail. Again, not going crazy. Alright, so grab this one and move this back so that we're following this edge as best as possible. Doesn't need to be exact, but it just, whoops. It can help with the UV mapping later on. Let's go with, let's see. Let's just hide the avatar for the moment. So even though we've got it showing, and the gender option generally is to set the avatar that we're making our object for, we can still use it to just hide the mesh so that we can see what we're doing more clearly. Oops, that's gone a bit wonky. Why has that gone wonky? Ha! Oh, there we go, that's why. Double tap G, slide along. Nope, that doesn't work. Undo, undo. And then we can see that within a relatively short space of time, we have an object that we can set up So what we're going to do with this, once we've got it all modelled out, is it's a bubble pipe, obviously. So what we're going to do with this is, once we've got the mesh all set up, we're going to use the armature. We're going to create another bone. That's well, it won't be this particular armature, but once we click on set up mesh, that drops in the actual armature that's used in IMVU for the attachment system. And what we can do is add an extra bone to that armature that appears that'll be linked. What we'll do is we'll drop it in at the barrel or the opening of the pipe, and that will become a target for some particles. And what we can do is, when we bring this into Studio, we can set the bone up and we can have bubbles, a particle effect coming out of the pipe. But we need to just get this meshed up. It doesn't necessarily need to be. What we can also do so let's go with that's a little bit of an awkward shape there. But what we can do is this, so let's put in so Alt click, Alt click, double tap G. Now does that want to be yeah, that looks all right. Tidy this up a little bit. Oops. Oops. That's okay. So let's now Face select, inset. Extrude. And let's just collapse that. Oh, not collapse, but make that smaller. So that's our bubble pipe. Object, smoothing. So what we can do with this now is duplicate this and just make it a high res. Very simple high res. So Shift D or object, duplicate objects, press escape just to reset, and then enable Subdivision Surface. So we're going to lose quite a bit of definition relative to the low res. So we can see the high res is there, low res, high res, low res. So we lose quite a bit of shape. So just going to do some edits. And to make this easier, what we can do is select our low res, our game mesh, and in object properties, we can set display as, currently it's textured, we can select that and set that as wireframe. So we can see our high res underneath or through it, and our high res is a wireframe reference that we can then use to shape. And one of the reasons why we're using the one of the reasons why we're creating a high res is that we use the high res now in Studio. Now that we've got IMVU Studio, what we can do with the high res is, aside from baking the normal maps, the normal map will also contain the information about our sharp edges. So instead of, let's just quickly switch back to, instead of, whoops, setting edges or marking edges, so there's our edges, instead of marking those as sharp, which highlights them blue, and then if we use the edge split modifier, disable angle. So if we have if we have marked edges and sharp edges enabled, we'll get sharp edges. But now that we've got normal maps, we don't need to use this, because the normal map will contain information, structural information essentially, that will allow us to dispense with sharp edges and using the modifier. Let's just get rid of those. And that data will be kept within the normal map. So like so. So let's just do the end here. Just going to use the shortcut keys because it's quicker. But we can see how inset, whoops, don't do that one. Cancel that. Inset, extrude, that should be okay along the normal, yeah. So what we could do is create, where's that edge? There it is. Create a sharp edge like so, that will be baked into the normal map. That will then be essentially used by the low-res mesh in Studio and Desktop Beta to create a sharper edge around the low-res mesh. Got an article about this that explains it in more detail, but that's essentially one of the reasons why we want to start using normal maps. That looks a bit big, but it will do. For what we need. Hello, Awu. One of the things that we want to look out for as well, the low res is actually quite low res. So what we might want to do, so we can compensate for that in two ways. Let's just, are we still, yeah, we're still editing that one. Select all of that. Whoops. And expand it. So what we want is, let's just, if we make the high res a bit more high res, we can see that there's still quite a bit of difference between where the mesh is and where it needs to be. So we can compensate a little bit with that by just expanding them outwards. But what we might need to do to the low res is subdivide some of these major edges. Let's just hide the subdivide these outer edges to give us a slightly more round shape. Don't necessarily need to do it on the inside edges, but it's these outer edges which are essentially the profile that we're looking at when we're in IMVU or in game. We can sometimes see, regardless of the fact that we've got a normal map assigned to it, we can sometimes see this faceted shape or the faceted nature of the low resolution mesh. So what we can do, we don't want to go mad with this because it does add significant, whoops, it can add significantly to the mesh. So we just make that a little bit rounder. Let's go down the top. Oh, why is the, oh, it is wonky. Oh well. Make that a little rounder. Let's just check that. That's okay. Where is it? Oh, there we go. Just rename that. So that's pipe high. That's pipe low. So back to editing this. I wonder if we can do a that's a nice shape. Let's see if we can bake that. That will be our bubble pipe. Interesting. Okay, yeah, let's go with that. That was a happy accident. Right, so let's save this. File, save as. Where is it? Manager. Nope. Where's it gone? Accessories. 2.8. Bubble pipe. Right, bubble pipe. So that's the bubble pipe. That's the high res. So this is one of the other advantages of actually let's just notice. So again, so we can see the high res and the low res differs a little bit more significantly than we want. So let's this can be tricky to see. So right now, the cage, which is the underlying structure of the high resolution mesh. So this is the cage, but that's also the limitations or the boundary of the low res. So what we can do is just, I don't know how, but we can see the low res wireframe there, but we're expanding the cage for the high res outside the low res in order to get this the mesh of the high res to match more closely the profile of our low res. So we can see the low res poking through there, and the high res being much closer to that. So that's going to be our pipe. In fact, let's just do one little whoops. Doing this so we can see so what that will do is create a sharp edge on our normal map. So that's our bubble pipe high res, and that's our bubble pipe low res. So let's just extrude, move that to one side, No, let's move the high res. Yeah, our pipe's gone wonky, but that's okay. So if you, let's just duplicate this again. If you just enable Subdivision Surface modifier on your low res without doing anything to it, so this is our game object. This is what we're going to use in-game in IMVU. This is the game object with just a Subdivision Surface modifier assigned to it, and we can see that there is actually a significant difference in the shape, particularly along the profile of our object. So when we're creating normal maps from meshes, we want to make sure that we are actually doing something to the high res. This is the high res. Otherwise, we're going to get, well, we may very well introduce issues into the normal map that are going to look a little odd, shall we say, when the normal map is assigned to our low res in game. So don't get into the habit of just assigning, so we're in modifiers, just assigning Subdivision Surface modifier. More often than not, or it's more likely that you will need to actually edit your high res to get the shape that you want that's going to be more conducive to what we're wanting to see in game. So don't just apply a modifier and think that that's done. You can then bake your mesh, because that won't work. But let's just leave that there. Unedited. Right, so the next step, so let's save this file. Save as, version save. 2. So once we've got that, we have to do our normal map. We have to do the normal map. So for that, we need to just checking, make sure the stream's still going. It is. That's good. That's good. That's good. So what we have to do now is unwrap UV maps for our pipe. So does it have a material assignment? So materials? No. So create a new one. Pipe. Space, square bracket, 0, close square brackets. That's our IMVU compatible material name. Let's create a basic material, so complete that. So that's what we'll see in shading workspace. We have our basic material properties. There's our pipe. Add texture, image texture. So we need to create a new one. So click new. Let's call this pipe. We don't need the numerical append. 512 5. Let's go make it square. 512 by 512. We can use 512 by 512s in Studio. So generated type. It's blank at the moment, which is why it's black. Black because it's using the color sampler. So if you wanted, you could change that and it will apply that color once the material is complete. So we'll go with color grid. Okay. There's a color grid. So now we can do the UV unwrapping. So this could be tricky because it's an unusual shape. So let's see what we've got at the moment. So select all. So because we started from a cube, what we've essentially got is basically a messed up cube. In fact, let's just add mesh cube. Bring that up, just shrink it down so it's easy to... So that's our starting object, or was the starting object. So that is the default UV map for a cube. So because we edited that, we end up with a messed up UV map for a cube. So we have to unwrap our object. So we can do this in a couple of ways depending on what we are doing. So because we have a natural break in the mesh in the high res, whoops, what we can do is use that as a seam, so we can hide a seam there. What that will do is it'll split this section off from the rest of this, and we can flatten that out and then do something with this. We might be able to hide a seam, a UV seam, on this bottom part, which will then allow us to do the top part as a separate UV as well. But we'll see. So that is there. So that's Alt click, loop select. Place a seam, mark seam. We'll need to break the end. Place a seam. So if we unwrap this as it currently is, with those two seams, what we'll see is a bit of a mess. But so that's the U key, or UV unwrap. This is what we're seeing. So with our UVs, in the same way that we can use structure to hide UVs, what we can also do is hide UVs in places where they're not necessarily going to be seen by the user. So we can place a seam underneath to split this section. Oh, that didn't, why didn't that mark? So let's do that again. Edge, mark seam. So select all, U. So there is that section of the pipe. So let's do this. Could be tricky. So you're likely going to need to play around with different ways of unwrapping your objects. So let's try over the top. And then what we'll have to do here, we could hide the seam, but obviously that then means that if we put the seam down here to try and flatten, so we've got a contiguous loop of faces. If we put a seam at the bottom here to hide it, it then means that all we've done is just split this section, but we've still got these faces joined up. So rather than going around this section and splitting that, might as well just use the single edge at the top there and split it that way. Mark seam. So if we do this, so select all, A key, U key, unwrap. So we can press the U key if we're in the 3D view or over the UV editor. So that's that section. Would have been better if we could have kept it together, but that's okay. Now, from the point of view of an item being used in IMVU, you might ordinarily place a seam down the back of an object, because the back is obviously the perspective from the item being used by the user, but we want to hide the seam, so we want to place it on the, well, is this the back or the front? This is the back of the pipe. That's the front of the pipe. But relative to what the users see, they see the front of the pipe, not the back of the pipe. So we want to place seam. So let's place a seam so we can use this edge as a continuation up. Edge, mark seam, and then let's shift click. Let's split this top section off. So this will lay out as a flat section on its own, so it'll be around UV. And it's edge, mark seam, and we'll see that in a second. So what we've done here by placing this down here, it'll split the bowl so that it'll lay out flat. So again, A, U, so that's the mess we've got at the moment. So there's the bowl, and there is the top. So let's organize this a little bit. So those are our UV segments. So we've got the mouth bit that you put in your mouth. We've got this bottom section. We've got the bowl, and then we've got the top. So let's lay these out. That can go there, and that can go. So I might have to rotate this. Whoops. Let's go with the universal. Use the little widget. Try and use up as much UV as you can. Obviously, because of the shape of our object, we've still got quite a bit of waste. We can straighten some of these out. For example, we could straighten that out, but there's not really that much point. So that's our UV map. Go down to the top. Let's just rotate that so that it is. Yeah, we made the mesh wonky. That's okay though. Makes it more unique. Right, so that's our material and our UV map. So let's save that. I'll save as. Number 3. So what we're going to do next is bake our normal map. So we're going to use the high res and the low res to bake our normal map. So best way of doing this. Okay, so what we want to do first, I guess, is go back to shading workspace. We need to just modify our material slightly. So add texture, image texture, then add vector normal map. So connect color output to color input of the normal map, and then normal to normal on our visible BSDF. Select our high res. Oops, high res. Move that into position. So when you move your objects, make sure that you are either holding down the control key, or if you've arbitrarily moved your object and you try and move it back and it's not going to match up, so long as you've used the same base object where the origin point is the same for the high res, you should be able to use the location coordinates. So this could be a bit tricky because they're not. Let's just go with 10. What was that? Let's go with 9.5. 9.5. 9.5. We can do it numerically, or what we can do is select our object, select our target object, and then is it snap? Yeah, selection to active. So many shortcut keys, even I can't remember what they are. And that will snap our high res or object B to object A, which is the active object. So it doesn't matter if you accidentally shifted this all over the place. A quick way of fixing that in terms of matching them up for normal map baking is selecting the object you want to move to the object you want to move it to. And the object, snap, selection to active. But get into the habit of holding the control key down so it snaps to the grid, which then just makes it easier to move it back and forth. Right, so what we need to do here is make sure our image texture for our normal map is selected. Select the high res, shift click the low res. We want to go into render properties, and we want to shift render engine from Eevee to cycles, because we don't have access to the bake options otherwise, and there are the bake options at the bottom. And we want to change the bake type from combined to normal. There it is. And then once we've got those options, enable selected to active, expand the options, and just do an initial bake. So don't worry about the settings for the moment. We've got our high res selected, shift click the low res. So we're baking the high res to the low res. Just click the bake button and see what happens. Aha, no image. No image in the material. So that's error number 1 that's often missed out. So new pipe underscore normal. Same size, 512 by 512. Color grid. Okay. Color space, set that to non-color. It doesn't matter at the moment because we're just using a placeholder. But again, make sure that image node is selected. Hello, undefined. Undefined instrument. That's an interesting name. Wait, wait, wait. Oh, yes. Yeah, so make sure that is select. Whenever you're baking anything, actually, you want to make sure that the image that you are baking to, the image node is selected. Oh, thanks. So let's try that again. So high res, low res, bake. Oops, so there is our baked normal map. And it's a little funky at the moment, but that's okay because we've at least got a normal map. So a little explanation about what's going on. So this is our normal map. And we can see that it's got these weird colors. Essentially what we want is a normal map that's comprised of all these purpley, reddish, bluish colors. We don't want green. When green appears, it usually means that the high res and the low res meshes are intersecting. Now, the way to fix that isn't to then just to edit or re-edit the meshes. The way to address that is to use, where has it gone? These two settings, either max ray distance or extrusion. Now, you can switch between one or the other. Generally speaking, you won't necessarily need to use both. But what this does is it will essentially it creates a gap between the two, even though there isn't one. So this is why we get all this green stuff. So what it's essentially doing is doing a mathematical gap to allow the process to see what's going on in these areas properly. So if we increase that to, let's just say, let's try 1 first, extrusion, 1 meter, and rebake. Let's see what it does. Oh, that's all we needed to do. I was expecting to do more. But we might still get some minor errors. So we get things like this. So sometimes, because texture baking doesn't have anti-aliasing yet. So anti-aliasing is the ability to essentially blur out these sorts of issues. So what we might have to do, let's try increasing that to 2. Bake. No, that didn't make any difference. So we might need to do some third-party cleanup. That was with extrusion. Let's try, whoops, max distance. Let's just rebake this to get back to what we had. Right, so that's the mess. Let's try a max ray distance. Bake. That hasn't fixed it. This is what I mean about, so let's try 5. That hasn't fixed it. This is what I mean about, you may need to either use both or just the one to fix problems. Because using both, so max ray distance in this particular instance doesn't really do anything for us, so we can zero that out. And we'll get our baked image. But what that now means is, let's just save this before we move. So because we baked, the image menu has a little asterisk, which basically means something's been done, something's changed. So we have with vector image. So we're going to save this. Save as blah blah blah. Pipe normal PNG. Let's go with a lossless. We can either go with a lossless format, bitmap TIFF, or just turn compression completely off so that we're storing as much raw data as we can. So save as image. What that will also do is lock this into the project. If we go into shading workspace now, we'll now see our normal map is associated with the material now. So if we hide, let's go into layout. If we hide the pipe, go into rendered view. Where's the light in it? Oh, we need to add a light. Add light point. Where's that added? Right down at the bottom. I need to increase that a little bit. So 10 watts. Let's go with 50. And this is where the computer says no. Duplicate. So we can see, well, it might not be that clear on the image, on the stream, but our faceted edge, although we can see the facets because wireframe is enabled, might be able to see this highlighted edge here that is the normal map. So the normal map has created or will create the impression of a smooth edge over that. And it's done the same for our other bits here as well. So what has it done for this? Yep, and it's done it here as well. So we've got an edge defined by our normal map. That looks okay. Let's just actually, whilst we've got that, so that's with normal map, that's without. Difference is subtle, but so that's without, that's with. Easier to see in Eevee because it's quicker. Well, relatively. So that's without, that's with, without, with, and we can see that there is a pretty significant difference between the two. But that's what normal maps will do. So they're worth playing around with for IMVU. So that's the pipe. So let's save the project, and I think what we'll do here is call it quits for the day, and then in the next stream we can concentrate on setting this up for IMVU as an accessory and then getting it into Studio and setting up the particle system. So in this video, what we've basically done is just created the mesh, the pipe mesh. So in the next vid stream, we'll set this up for IMVU. Right, so it was only supposed to be a bit of a test today, test stream, because we haven't done one in a while. So thanks for lurking, lurkers, and thanks Undefined and Awu for sticking around and commenting. And we shall see you on the next stream. Oof. Right, bye for now.